Hello, my name is Ben Young. I'm the head of the Global Medical Directors at ViiV Healthcare. Today, I'd like to spend a little bit of time giving a rather high altitude view of grant writing and what funders are interested in seeing in successful grant applications. For background, I think it's germane for you to know that I spent many years both as a clinician and then as a clinician investigator before joining the pharmaceutical industry a couple of years ago. So I want to share with you a bit of the perspectives of what makes a successful journey, a successful application for early career investigators. So this is my disclosure. I am a full-time employee of ViiV Healthcare, a private sector pharmaceutical company. So let me start this discussion with a very high altitude and very non-specific discussion about what funders want. Funders, in this case, like a private sector organization, but also public sector organizations have priorities. One's application needs to be aligned with those priorities. In fact, one should be looking for potential funders based on what kinds of research one might be interested in. One's application needs to be aligned with the strategy of the organization. You certainly don't want to be to the organization or even counter to the strategy, especially the commercial strategy of the organization. Organizations are interested in medical and therapeutic outcomes, and of course, one needs to think about what the companies might be interested in, what the organizations are interested in from a medical or therapeutic perspective. Many organizations are interested in capacity building and sustainability, either as a primary or sometimes a strong secondary outcome of funding research. And of course, issues related to ethics, whether it's related to the conduct of the study or the study population, are important priorities for many organizations. Let me spend a few moments talking about what funders and especially the reviewers of research applications want to see in a proposal. Clearly, having rigorous methodology and proposal design is a key element of a successful application. Does one have sufficient organizational support or the research resources to actually conduct the proposed study? Are there plans for the capacity building and sustainability, especially for early and mid-career investigators? Related to that, is the study feasible in the institution or the study population? Because there could be very interesting proposals, but frankly not feasible given the resources available to the investigator. And then lastly, if successful, do the results of the research have impact in the environment? Are there plans for disseminating the results of that research? So let's go from the very broad to the more specific and talk about research in the HIV area. One, I think, needs to identify one's area of interest and identify data gaps within that area. But there's a broad range of opportunities of scholarly and important research in HIV medicine. I'm going to focus on ones that are related more on the clinical side of things and not the basic side. But again, I think what I'm going to say is germane across that broad subject area. So one could be involved in epidemiology. Epidemiology can be from single case reports or small case series to large local, national, or even global cohort studies. Treatment efficacy, of course, is an important area and one that pharmaceutical companies like ours, of course, are interested in supporting. But in HIV medicine, we also know that we have very effective, very efficacious medicines, but yet globally, there's still many, many individuals who don't get them. And so looking at the questions of implementation and the issues of patient-reported outcomes are rich opportunities today. So in regards to implementation science is a relatively new science. It's a science that understands that globally, despite the fact that we have very good testing and very good medication, many people remain untested or untreated. And so it's the science that tries to not look at efficacy as an endpoint, but understanding what solutions work for specific populations of people and why those interventions work and where they work. Implementation science also has different types of outcomes, seemingly unconventional outcomes. They come in a range of domains. They include implementation-specific outcomes, service outcomes, client outcomes, but they include the terms acceptability or appropriateness or fidelity of the implementation. They include service outcomes related to efficiency or effectiveness or timeliness of the outcome. They also include client-based outcomes of satisfaction or functional outcomes. And importantly, in the end, no single measure actually looks at the entire story of implementation. But one can get involved in implementation research by looking at just a handful of these that are within the scope of one's research environment. So having identified an area of interest and data gaps, then one needs to develop a hypothesis. One's proposal has to be very clearly aimed at answering that hypothesis. I've seen far too many proposals that look very interesting, but in fact, this proposed research doesn't actually answer the study aim and hypothesis. Is the study feasible? Do you have the tools and the populations to answer the question? Do you have adequate institutional support or collaborator support? Management guidelines often give you hints for where there is rich opportunity for research. Here's one example taken from our work at the International Association of Providers of AIDS Care several years ago, looking at specific research gaps in optimizing the HIV care continuum. Each one of those bullet points represents significant data gaps with clinical and public health implications and provide a rich opportunity for scholarly activity. Treatment guidelines like the US Department of Health and Human Services often do something very similar. Here's a table taken from the DHSS guidelines that give you the recommendations and the strength and quality of recommendations regarding laboratory monitoring for people living with HIV. Importantly, focus on the numerical part of the recommendation. The guideline panels give these recommendations or grade the strength of the data that support the recommendation. Recommendations with grades 2 or 3 are recommendations where the quality of the data is not so strong, and opportunities again for research to help support and strengthen the recommendation. Private sector organizations and many public sector organizations offer RFPs and RFAs, requests for funding applications and proposals. Here's one taken from our company from earlier this year, looking at long-acting injectable therapy for HIV. We actually sent out a request for applications regarding implementation science about the feasibility and acceptability of delivery models, innovative delivery models, or addressing challenges in high-risk populations or marginalized, underrepresented populations of people. These RFPs and RFAs, again, are very rich opportunities for, in a competitive sense, for research applications. At ViiV Healthcare, we support many research programs around the world, programs that are investigator-sponsored, where people come to us requesting support, sometimes drug support, sometimes financial support, sometimes collaborative support. And those studies can take a wide range of structures, from conventional clinical trials to non-interventional studies, including observational studies, including meta-analyses. Other studies that can come in the form of mathematical and health economic models, or as I've already said, implementation science. So a brief and quite non-specific funder's view of the grant application process for early and mid-career investigators. I look forward to additional conversations during our session.